blue-white light ripped across the rain like a camera flash from the sky, and Lydia Barnes went flying backward into the mud. I had just yanked the main cutoff on my side of the fence. One more beat, and that open panel would have eaten her alive. And even then, she pointed at me while sirens curled down our street shouting. He wired it. He did this, and I kept my voice low, so I wouldn't shake. I said, I recorded everything. Lydia, tonight, the truth is louder than your sprinklers. I didn't move to Sycamore Loop in Ashwood County for any of this. I came for quiet evenings and a roof that could pay its own light bill. I'm Evan Cole. I design lighting fixtures for a living. The most exciting part of my day is usually whether a diffuser reads warm or cool, so I pulled every permit past every inspection and built a tidy Solar Plus backup system that sat legally isolated from the HOA grid. You know what I mean? The kind of setup where even a city inspector nods and says, "Looks good." The first time the lights died, it was one of those heavy nights where the air feels like it's pressing a hand on your chest. 3D printer was humming along then. Dead quiet. The fridge exhaled like a tired dog, monitors blinked off. And when I stepped outside with my flashlight, there she was. Lydia in white sneakers and a cardigan at midnight, pruning shears in her hand, like she was deadheading roses. Kneeling at my service conduit. Not hiding, not even flinching under the beam, just quoting it like Scripture. Section 7, Article 4. Unauthorized exterior cabling is a safety hazard. Snip 2 copper snakes tongued out of the cut, and she gave me that vice principal smile. People practice in the mirror. Rules are for everyone. Mr. Cole, file for reinstatement after review. Then a sprinkler on her side clicked and hissed like a punchline. I filmed the damage, whispered a prayer over a camping lantern, and woke to a notice of violation slid under my door. Unapproved auxiliary generation noise pollution privacy concerns, which was hysterical because the only noise the night before was her shears and my dignity leaking. So I walked it over to the treasurer. Tommy Rourke, the retiree who can fix anything with a butter knife, and he rubbed his temples and said, HOA officers don't touch resident service lines. That's county jurisdiction. And I asked why she kept doing it, and he sighed. Because she wins by exhausting people. Most folks pay the little fines and move on, and you didn't move on. I filed a clean complaint with the county, timestamps, photos, doorbell video, and heard back from Inspector Daniel Price, got your footage. Mr. Cole, unusual. We'll take a look, and for a while the neighborhood went quiet, in the kind of way that doesn't feel like peace. It feels like an intermission nobody asked for. Lydia didn't slow down every time I pulled a sliver of power off my truck inverter to keep the freezer cold. Her curtains twitched every other day. Another envelope showed up about glare or decibels or that tiny wildlife cam. Facing my own fence line, and one rainy morning, the motion cam caught her in a clear poncho with a cheap umbrella. Prying at my generator enclosure, she leaned close, saw the little red LED wink, and hissed straight into the lens. You think you're clever, Evan. First time, she said my name like it tasted wrong. I forwarded that clip to Price, and he called with a careful voice, "Don't touch anything. We'll bring a safety officer." And you'd think that would cool a person down. But some people don't slow when they see a line, they speed up. A storm rolled in. Like it had an opinion. My camera pinged, and I stepped onto the porch to find a figure crouched at the fence. The beam hit his face. A man soaked to the bones in a work jacket with wire cutters, and eyes that looked like they slept poorly, even when life was good. Stay back, he said. You don't understand. Then he spilled it like a man. Too tired to lie. She's losing everything she told me to help, or she'd ruin me. She wants to trip the HOA transformer and blame your setup. If the neighborhood goes dark, she says, they'll finally see you. Destabilize the grid, and my stomach slid into my shoes. Where is she? Substation by the retention pond right now. I didn't check the locks. I grabbed my keys, and the truck turned over like a dog, hearing the leash jingle. Chain link fence, rusted danger sign trying to flap off the post, the heavy smell of copper in wet air. And there she was, Lydia, in a plastic poncho with a tool roll open at her feet. "Step away from that panel," I shouted through the fence, and she turned with a face that couldn't pick a lane between fury and fear, and that brittle certainty people call leadership when it works out for them. "You did this. You made them hate me," and I said, "You did that. When you started cutting what isn't yours, walk away. You'll get yourself killed. But real life isn't tidy. Real. People double down." And she reached in with pliers. The sky answered with a white-blue crack that blew the night apart. She flew back and hit the mud in a way that made the world feel wrong. My legs moved before fear could argue. I sprinted the fence line, killed the feed from my side, slid through a gap I shouldn't admit exists, dragged her clear by her hood. The air smelled like ozone, and fried plastic sirens faded in an Ashwood County deputy I recognized from football games. Took my statement under a halogen that flickered like an old horror movie, and he shook his head like he didn't have the right words. "You again, huh?" I said, not luck patterns, and he wrote that down like a man who has learned to keep a straight face. Morning put on a bright shirt like it hadn't been in a fight. Tommy shuffled over with coffee and said she'd live minor burns. Sheriff pushing charges for tampering and trespass and negligence. Board calling for an audit. And I nodded, not because it felt good, but because sometimes accountability sounds like a seatbelt click. You don't cheer, you just breathe. Except my breathing felt wrong, because people like Lydia don't lose quietly. They short harder. And sure enough, that afternoon, an email came from a so-called regional investigator with no signature and a landline. We all knew from HOA newsletters sent at 11:48 p.m. I forwarded it to Price, and he called with a tired laugh. "Not us. Keep your cameras on us," so I set everything to full coverage and waited out the kind of silence that pretends to be peace. Inspection day drew 2 White County trucks and half the block accidentally home. Lydia had pastries out like optics could hold a circuit closed. Price ignored the sugar and crouched where the irrigation line crossed the boundary. Popped a panel and sighed. In that way, you hear from dads who have seen enough holiday lights to know trouble by the smell. Household extension cord spliced into a 20-amp in open soil solenoids, pulling off the same feed as the boundary lights. The safety officer wrote a temporary disconnect order, like a mechanic writing a bad news estimate. Lydia tried volume. "You can't, the lawns will dry out." And Price didn't look up. Better dry grass than a dead neighbor. People at their mailboxes pretended not to hear and absolutely heard, you know what I mean. That night, she slid an emergency HOA meeting notice onto my door. "Mandatory attendance," Tommy called 5 minutes later. "She's fast-tracking a vote to suspend your membership for endangering safety." Can she do that? Technically, if the board lets her. But folks are tired. Bring receipts. So I did a manila folder with a doorbell video of her midnight pruning motion stills of her. At my generator, the county report stamped hard and listing her address. And Tommy brought his own folder payments routed to a defunct landscaping company, Her husband's old outfit labeled electrical improvements. Yeah, that happened. Her living room did its best impression of a courtroom. Folding table stack of bylaws, a crowd pretending not to record, and absolutely recording. She gave a speech about harmony and property integrity and order, then pointed at me like she could puncture the air. This resident has violated safety standards and harassed board members and defamed the HOA. And I didn't talk over her because that never changes a mind. I put the video up on her own TV snip under porch light. Screwdriver in the rain. Slid the stamped report to the board. Tapped the ledger where the defunct company's name sat like a stain. City and county-owned service lines, not you. You, not this board. Tampering is a crime, and these payments don't match any licensed business in Ashwood County. The room pulled tight like a drum. Someone whispered that she fined them for wind chimes. Another set of shutters. A hair too blue, and you could feel the tide slip out from under her feet. A cruiser rolled to the curb because earlier she had cranked the sprinklers to tantrum and tripped something ugly. The officer walked in. Calm, Lydia lunged for the old move. It's him! He wired my sprinklers to electrocute me. The officer watched. My clips glanced out the window at the scorched junction box, and the coil of orange cord peeking from fresh mulch exhaled through his nose and said, "Ma'am, this shows you and another party splicing into a marked boundary conduit. That's not how this works." And for a second, even the wall clock forgot to tick. Tommy leaned in and said, "We vote now board only." They huddled like a tired basketball team that suddenly remembered how to pass, and the vote was quick. Tommy stood with his hands folded like a prayer, finally learned, and said, effective immediately, removal of Lydia Barnes as president, administrative privileges, revoked records forwarded to the Regional Association and Ashwood County. He tapped a coffee mug like a gavel, and it sounded more final than any courtroom would. Her clipboard slipped, and fines and notices and signatures scattered like snow in a house that never sees winter. The officer asked her to step outside to take a statement. She did, stiff and blinking, and I stood in the doorway and didn't smile, because sometimes winning isn't joy. It's a quiet exhale that tastes like honesty. Tommy touched my shoulder and said, "Did it with receipts. That's how it sticks." And I nodded, not because I felt victorious, but because I felt awake, like maybe the price of quiet is telling the truth in a loud room. A week later, a plain envelope landed in my mailbox. No return address, a single page in tidy cursive. "You were right about me. I needed control, because everything else was slipping. They'll take it all." Now, maybe that's better. Maybe you built something here that works without me. No signature, just half an L that never made it to Lydia. I put it in the back of the same folder as the screenshots and invoices shut. The drawer stepped outside and listened to the lights. The soft hum of a house that minds its business. Her old sprinkler heads were still there across the fence like chrome mushrooms. Pointing at my yard, I left them as reminders, not trophies, because the truth is messier than heroes and villains. I was a guy who wanted coffee and peace, and a woman mistook being obeyed for being needed, and we met in the rain, where electricity and water don't negotiate. So tell me this. If you were on that porch the second the vote went through and the officer clicked on his body cam, and she started talking, would you say I did the right thing every step? Or did I cross a line when I held up a mirror and let the neighborhood see the sparks for themselves? Drop your take in the comments. Tell me where the line is between order and control on a street like ours. And if you've lived through something like this, I want to hear it. Who was right? Who was wrong? And what justice actually looked like when the rules stopped protecting the bully and finally protected the block.